Hey everyone, Lewis aka Spider-Man 991, continuing my issue by issue review for the final story arc of Invincible. The name of the arc is The End of All Things, and this is issue 139, which is part 7 of the 12-part story arc. I'm going to start off with a brief summary of the issue, then I'll get into what I liked about it. As the battle from the last issue continues, one of the Coalition scientists detects a heartbeat from Mark's father, Nolan. Eve, Mark's wife, rushes into space in order to save him. Eve is able to get Nolan to get into a force field, but on her way back, she's attacked by one of Thrag's raptor creatures. Anissa saves her, but unfortunately, Anissa gets fatally wounded. And as Eve is moving both Nolan and Anissa back to the spaceship, Anissa pretty much tells Eve that she had a son with Mark. Back to the battle, though, things are really getting heated up between Mark and Thrag, especially because Mark believes that his dad's dead. And obviously the adrenaline, the rage, and everything. During this fight, Thrag reveals to Mark that he really doesn't care about how things turn out for his children because he's basically using them as suicide soldiers, just send them out there just to die and just be human shields and stuff. And he even starts throwing some of them at Mark, and they just immediately disintegrate as soon as Mark swats them. Thrag's actions and declarations cause his daughter Ursal, one of the first of Thrag's kids, to kill who played a hand in the murder of Mark's brother Oliver. She pretty much orders her siblings to stand down because their father's doesn't really care about them, to which they all agree to. The issue then concludes with the rest of the coalition members bringing Thrag's children into custody. Also, the med team is looking at Nolan and Anissa, and one of the words that the med team says is, "This one, Nolan, has a heartbeat." So I don't know what that means for Anissa, but probably not good. And what happened to Mark and Thrag? Well, Mark decided to move their little fight to the surface of the sun. And that's where the issue ends. Nolan being alive, I gotta be honest, I have kind of mixed feelings about it, because when I saw it happen in the story, I was like, oh shit, this is getting real. Like, this was, like, whenever you kill a main character, knowing that this is the final arc, it's like, oh shit, there's no way they could come back from that. But I mean, Nolan was a great character. Nolan's story in the series does get as much attention as Mark's does, which is great. And if you saw my previous reviews, you'll know that I said that Nolan's death would probably mean a lot more character development for Mark and maybe some story arcs to go into what will happen once the story reaches its end. But now that Nolan's alive, it just feels like, okay, what's gonna happen? It kind of makes the future of Mark a little uncertain, although we don't know exactly what this means if Nolan is gonna come back, because he was pretty messed up. And if he does come back, there is a possibility that my original idea was that if Nolan is really gone, then Mark would pretty much become the new leader of the Viltrumites on Earth. Of course, this could mean that because of Nolan's injuries, after this he may finally decide to retire and Mark becomes the leader anyway. But that's just my theory about it. Also, the other thing big thing that happened was Anissa telling Eve about her son. Now, if you haven't, just to give you a little detail about what's so important. Back when the purebred Viltrumites went to Earth, decided to stay on Earth and like sort of procreate there, Anissa refused to procreate with humans, so she went after Mark, and she did it forcibly. And eventually, though, whenever Anissa made like a minor appearance or something, Mark would always feel uncomfortable by her. Eventually, Mark did tell Eve what happened with her. Then, recently, he told his dad about it. And prior to this, though, after Mark and Eve come back to Earth after an extended period of time, you find out Anissa has a son that looks a lot like Mark, and she even calls the boy Marky. So that's clearly, so Anissa having to reveal that she did have a son with Mark, but telling it to Eve, it does set up a interesting thing that could happen, because at this point, I'm not sure if Eve is gonna tell Mark, because it took a while for Mark to tell Eve about Anissa. Also, before Anissa's attack, Mark also kind of lied to Eve and went on a trip to another alternate Earth so he could kill one of his enemies to make sure that they don't come back. And when he came back, Eve wanted to break up with him. Honestly, it could really, Eve, whether or not she tells Mark, it could go either way. But I think in a way, because of seeing how much But I think since Eve was always on the other end of Mark keeping secrets from her, I think that Eve would know, and how she felt when she found out the truth from Mark. I think that this might influence Eve to immediately tell Mark about it. Because otherwise, I think if Mark finds out that Robot has been keeping the Viltrumites' children hostage on Earth, he might end up finding out about his son that way. So either way, Mark will find out, but I think coming from Eve will probably be the much safer method. Since this issue is still, again, just one giant battle, Ryan Ottley does an amazing job with the artwork. The fight scenes are really epic and big. They're fantastic. Also, the way he draws the characters' facial expressions is great because the characters are in space. They can't really communicate with their mouths, so instead, all of their dialogue is exchanged telepathically, but still, Ottley does a good job capturing the facial expressions to match the emotions along with their words. Also, speaking of the dialogue, Robert Kirkman does have some cool one-liners in this issue. So overall, Invincible, the End of All Things, it is still an awesome story arc. This is a really great way to end one of my favorite comics of all time. I'm loving it. If you haven't read Invincible yet, I highly recommend you read this comic, the whole thing, because it is epic. It's awesome. I loved it. It's one of my top 5 comics that I recommend to people all the time. But that's it for me. Thank you again for watching. Check out my other, if you haven't seen the previous parts of this review, I have a playlist for them that you can, I have a playlist to them so you can watch them from the very beginning. Thank you again for watching. Remember to stay subscribed and notified. I'm Spider-Man 1991 saying see you later.